I had a plan, even after my husband abandoned me, our 6-year-old daughter and a baby, for his mistress. I never imagined that night of celebration would mark the beginning of my tragedy. My husband, Anthony Williams, was a charismatic and attractive man who had just received a promotion at work. A lavish party was held to celebrate his achievement. I wore a red dress with pride, the one Anthony had given me on our last wedding anniversary. Our daughter Anna was staying with her grandmother, and baby Isaac was sleeping peacefully with the babysitter. I believed that night would be perfect, a memory I would cherish forever with joy. It was indeed destined to be a special night, though not for the reasons I had imagined. The moment I stepped into the venue, I sensed something was wrong. I noticed the whispers, the fleeting glances exchanged between Anthony's colleagues, and the way he seemed to avoid me. I dismissed these signs as mere tension, trying not to worry. Anthony was busy attending to his superiors and basking in everyone's attention, barely approaching me. I sat alone at the table, feeling isolated, despite the laughter and music filling the room. Still, I didn't want to show my displeasure because I understood how important this night was for him. My anxiety peaked when Anthony disappeared onto the balcony with his colleague Charlotte. She was young and strikingly beautiful, and I knew how men looked at her, though I never dreamed my husband would be one of them. Driven by an irresistible urge, I headed to the balcony. What I saw there shattered my world in an instant. Anthony and Charlotte were passionately kissing, completely oblivious to their surroundings. The sound of my glass slipping from my trembling hands broke the silence. Anthony looked at me with a mixture of surprise and irritation. Charlotte, far from being ashamed, glared at me with a malicious smile. Through my tears, I asked them what this meant for our family. What about our children and me? Anthony tried to maintain his composure, telling me not to make a scene and that we should discuss this at home. Hurt and humiliated, I left without waiting for any further explanation. I felt everyone's eyes following me. As I left, my heart shattering into pieces. When I returned home, the children were still asleep, and I sat on the sofa, crying as my red dress crumpled around me. That night, time passed like a painful whisper. When Anthony finally came home, he declared that he couldn't continue this life anymore, that Charlotte made him feel alive again in a way I no longer could. He spoke about it, as if it were just a business matter. I screamed in uncontrollable anger, asking how he could say such things when I had sacrificed everything for him, my career and my dreams, all to support him. Anthony coldly replied that this had been my mistake, that he had never asked for such sacrifices, and declared it was over as he would start a new life with Charlotte. His icy words froze my heart as I realized Anthony wasn't just ending our marriage, but trying to take everything we had built together. A few days later, I discovered he had transferred all our assets into his name. Our joint account was empty, and he had even taken our family car. All I was left with was a small amount of money and the responsibility of raising our children. Every day became a battle against despair while caring for my children. I had once been a strong and optimistic woman, but life had reduced me to ashes. My heart ached when Isaac's cries woke me at night and when I saw the fear in Anna's eyes as she watched her exhausted mother. Yet in the midst of this suffering, I found a spark of determination. I swore I wouldn't sink any deeper, for my children's sake and my own. I decided to look for work, but quickly realized how difficult returning to the workforce would be after years as a housewife. I went from office to office, restaurant to restaurant, even offering my services as a housekeeper, only to face rejection and humiliating words. Once, a college friend offered me a job as an assistant at a boutique, but the conditions were so terrible I had to decline. The nights in our small rented room seemed endless as I sat beside Isaac's crib and next to Anna sleeping on an old mattress. During those lonely hours, I remembered my life before everything fell apart, the laughter at our dinner table, the dreams I shared with Anthony, and the false security I had felt in our marriage. Now those memories pierced my heart like daggers. One night, while going through our few belongings, I found a family photograph. It showed Anthony holding Anna, with me embracing them both. I cried until I had no strength left, but as daylight began to fill the room, something changed within me. Those tears weren't of resignation but of release. I decided I wouldn't let Anthony or Charlotte determine my fate. I had 2 reasons to get up every morning: Anna and Isaac. Even though I didn't know how to move forward, I vowed to myself that I would. I determined that I wouldn't let Anthony and Charlotte succeed. As days turned into weeks, my daily routine became a battle for survival. I woke up before sunrise, my body still aching from my suffering. My eyes were swollen from sleepless nights, filled with a mixture of sadness and determination. No matter what difficulties squeezed me, I had no other choice. I had to find a way to provide a decent life for my children. Our small room was modest and inadequate, with dull gray walls that were peeling in places. Our only possessions were a donated crib, an old bed, and a makeshift table made from wooden boxes. Still, I did my best to keep the place clean. While hand-washing our few clothes each day, Anna, curious and eager to help, would try to assist with small tasks. Despite her young age, Anna seemed to sense the tension in the air, yet she never complained. I carried Isaac in a baby sling and held Anna's hand as we walked through the streets looking for work. Most days we returned home with nothing but dry bread and a little water. My despair grew as I watched my children paying the price for Anthony's mistakes. One afternoon, walking under the scorching sun, Anna suddenly stopped and pulled my hand. She innocently asked why we weren't living in our big house anymore. Her innocent question pierced my heart like a blade. Though my lips trembled, I managed to stay strong. I knelt down to her eye level and hugged her tightly. I told her we were starting a new life and things would get better soon, though I had no idea how to make that promise come true. That night, as I gave Isaac the last of the formula from the can, I sat by the cracked window and looked up at the night sky. The stars twinkled faintly, reminding me of my mother's words about stars being witnesses to our struggles and hopes. With a mix of resignation and strength, I made my decision. I would no longer wait for help or mourn what I had lost. Even though Anthony and Charlotte had left me penniless, I would build something from nothing. I vowed to move forward, even if I had to fight the whole world. My first step was to return to school. I had dropped out of college to support Anthony, but now I saw it as an opportunity to regain my dignity. I found an evening adult education program, where I could study basic business management. I had no money for tuition, but I spoke with the program director and pleaded my case. The principal offered to waive the fees if I would clean the classrooms after classes. I accepted the offer without hesitation. Every night, after putting the children to bed, I left them with a neighbor and headed to school. After cleaning the floors and windows until my hands were blistered, I felt a satisfaction I hadn't experienced in months. My grades were excellent from the start, and I quickly became one of the standout students in the class. However, not every day was filled with hope. Hunger and exhaustion took their toll, and sometimes my health suffered. There were moments when I wanted to give up everything. One early morning, returning from school, I found Isaac crying hysterically. We had run out of formula. I held my baby, crying and whispering apologies for not being able to provide what he needed. At that moment, I remembered Mrs. Victoria, the elderly lady who lived nearby. She had offered help a few days earlier. Though my pride resisted accepting charity, my children's hunger led me to her door. Mrs. Victoria welcomed me with a warm smile, saying she had been expecting me, and telling me not to worry, that she always had something ready for me and the children. She offered me soup and gave Anna bread. Mrs. Victoria's kindness became a healing balm for my soul. She taught me how to prepare meals with limited resources and gave me advice on surviving poverty. She also encouraged me to look for work that would make use of what I was learning at school. One day, looking through an old newspaper, I found an advertisement for an assistant position at a small local company. Though the salary wasn't much, it could be an opportunity to prove my capabilities. Nervous but determined, I went for the interview. Ron Brown, the middle-aged business owner, was impressed by my attitude. He told me that while I had little recent work experience, he could see I was studying and seriously trying to move forward, and that was what mattered most. He smiled and offered me the job. I could barely hold back tears of relief, and that night when I got home, I hugged my children tightly. For the first time in a long while, I felt a glimmer of light in my life. However, the challenges were only beginning. The work at the company was demanding, and some colleagues showed clear hostility toward me as a single mother. I endured their criticism and cruel words through difficult days. Gradually, I began to stand out and earn the trust of Ron and some colleagues. Eventually, I managed to save enough money to buy new clothes for Anna and Isaac. The children were overjoyed and showed grateful smiles. One afternoon, as I was organizing documents in the office, Ron approached me with a serious expression. He told me he was very impressed with my work and suggested I take more advanced training, saying there was plenty of room for growth here. Although I knew this would mean even less time at home, I accepted. I felt each step was progress toward reclaiming the life Anthony had taken from me. The days felt strangely both fast and slow to me. My life seemed divided into two worlds. One was the world where I worked hard at Ron's small company, learning and gradually gaining trust. The other was the world where I faced endless challenges as a single mother in poverty. While there was a small light of hope, the weight of the past pressed on my shoulders, reminding me of my vulnerability. One evening, as the sun was setting and the streets were bathed in twilight, I returned home from a long day at work. Anna greeted me with a bright smile, but there was something uneasy in her eyes. Playing with a loose thread on her clothes, she told me that her father had come by that day. I felt as if my breath had stopped. There had been no contact from Anthony since he left. Somewhere in my heart I had expected him to visit the children someday, but I never thought he would appear so suddenly. The pain I had tried to bury came rushing back like a merciless torrent. Trying to stay calm, I asked what he wanted. Anna told me he had said he wanted to see me and Isaac, and that he would take them somewhere nice soon. She looked at me with a mixture of hope and innocence, asking if it was true. I felt tears welling up, but managed to force a smile. I told her that her father loved them both very much, but not to worry for now, that I would always be here with them. As I said this, I held Anna tightly, trying to control my trembling voice. That night, I couldn't sleep. Anthony's presence felt like a shadow following me. I remembered how he had left without remorse, leaving me vulnerable and in debt. Now, just when I had worked so hard to rebuild my life, he had returned with empty promises. Yet I knew I couldn't let hatred consume me. My children remained my top priority. The next day at the office, I couldn't concentrate. Anna's words kept echoing in my head. I decided to confide in Ron. Nervously fidgeting with the edge of my notebook, I told him I needed his advice. Ron stopped reviewing his documents and looked at me carefully. He gently asked what was troubling me. I began telling him about the situation with Anthony, trying to remain objective, but my emotions spilled into my words despite my efforts. Ron listened quietly, nodding as I spoke. He spoke warmly, but firmly, telling me he understood how complicated my situation was, but reminded me that I had the power to decide how much Anthony could affect my life. He suggested that if Anthony was back now, it was probably because something had gone wrong in his life. While I had the right to protect myself, he reminded me to consider what was best for the children. I felt grateful for his words, though I still struggled internally. Should I let Anthony see the children, or keep them away for fear of being hurt again? That evening, while making soup for dinner, I decided to talk to Anthony directly. I couldn't let his presence remain a quiet threat. We met on Saturday morning in the park near my house. I brought Anna and Isaac, who ran happily among the trees. Meanwhile, I felt my heart pounding as I waited for Anthony. When he appeared, his presence felt strangely distant. He wore an expensive suit as always and had a calculated smile, but there was an unfamiliar shadow in his eyes I hadn't seen before. He extended his hand as if greeting a mere acquaintance, thanking me for coming. I made no attempt to hide my hostility as I told him I wasn't there for him but for the children, and he should say what he needed to say quickly as I didn't want to waste time. Anthony sighed as if he had expected this response. He told me he knew he had done wrong and truly understood it now, that he wanted to make it right and be part of the children's lives, to give them what they deserved. His voice seemed sincere, but anger began boiling inside me. With tears in my eyes, I challenged his notion of giving them what they deserved, asking if he was trying to buy their love. I told him love couldn't be bought, that what they needed wasn't things but stability, someone who wouldn't abandon them when things got difficult. Anthony lowered his eyes for a moment, as if my words had struck him hard. He said he wasn't asking for my forgiveness, he just wanted a chance to be a good father. I stared at Anthony as he spoke, his voice tinged with remorse, trying to read his true intentions. I felt something deep inside telling me to accept his words, even though I wasn't sure if I could trust him. My thoughts turned to Anna and Isaac, knowing that despite my hatred for Anthony, I couldn't deny them the right to know their father. After a long silence, I slowly nodded. I told Anthony that I understood, but he would have to follow my conditions, and if he caused any harm to the children, I would remove him from their lives without hesitation. My voice carried a strength that surprised even me. The agreement was made, but for me it only marked the beginning of a new uncertain phase. While Anthony promised to fulfill his responsibilities, I felt I needed to be prepared for anything. My distrust of him remained deep, but I decided to give him a chance for the children's sake. From the day I allowed Anthony to see the children, my life felt like walking a tightrope between past and present. Every time Anthony appeared with expensive gifts and sweet words, I felt my carefully contained wounds reopening. I couldn't help but question myself, wondering if I had made the right decision, if I should have sacrificed my peace of mind to give the children the father figure I never had. One afternoon, while I was preparing a simple dinner with vegetables, Anthony appeared without warning. He wasn't wearing his usual expensive clothes, but casual attire, though his characteristic arrogance still irritated me. Anna ran to him when she saw him, and Isaac raised his arms with an innocent smile, begging to be picked up. Anthony said he had just come to see the children and had brought something for them, showing a bag full of toys and clothes. I watched him with cautious eyes, though I couldn't deny that the children were enjoying his presence. Still, my instincts told me he wasn't being completely honest. Not wanting to create a scene in front of Anna, I chose to remain quiet. I thanked him for bringing the gifts, but told him it wasn't necessary, that what the children needed most wasn't things, but his time. My tone was unconsciously cold. Anthony nodded but avoided my eyes, seeming somehow guilty. During dinner, while the children were playing with their new toys, I decided to confront him. I asked Anthony what he was hiding, telling him he wouldn't just appear suddenly because he missed the children. Anthony sighed, seeming to struggle with whether to tell the truth or keep hiding it. Finally, he opened up and told me things were difficult, that he had lost his job and his relationship with Charlotte had ended. He admitted he wanted to be near the children because they gave him strength, his voice dropping at the last words. I felt a mix of anger, sympathy, and a slight relief at his honesty, but I couldn't let him use the children as his emotional escape. I told Anthony firmly, but calmly, that if he really wanted to be part of the children's lives, he needed to show it through actions, not words. I made it clear I wouldn't allow him to come and go from their lives as he pleased, that they needed stability, and if he couldn't provide that, he shouldn't come back. Anthony seemed to understand the weight of my words and nodded. He said goodbye to the children, promised to return, and left. Something still felt unsettling to me even after Anthony left. Anna, who had been playing quietly, came up to me and asked with innocent directness if her daddy would ever live with us again. I held her tightly, fighting back tears as I told her I didn't know, but promised her one thing I knew was certain, that I would never leave her, no matter what happened. That night, after putting the children to bed, I sat at our small table with a cup of cold tea. My mind was spinning with thoughts of Anthony, and worries about our future. Although I had made some progress with work and studies, I knew there was still a long road ahead. My savings were practically non-existent, barely covering our basic needs, and the debt Anthony had left in my name felt like an insurmountable burden. I decided I couldn't continue living in this uncertainty any longer. The next day, between work hours, I sought legal advice. Though I couldn't afford a lawyer, I found a local organization that offered free consultations to women in situations like mine. That's where I met Sarah, a young and passionate lawyer who immediately grasped the severity of my case. She explained that I had every right to demand Anthony take both emotional and financial responsibility for our children, regardless of what had happened between us. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I had someone on my side. Sarah explained the process of filing for child support, and though I knew it would be difficult, I was ready to face it. Things started moving quickly over the next few days. Sarah filed the formal request for child support payments from Anthony. At first, Anthony appeared cooperative, but problems soon arose when he began claiming insufficient income to meet the demands. Charlotte, who was still in contact with him, made the situation even more complicated. One afternoon, as I was leaving work, I found Charlotte waiting for me outside the building. She was perfectly dressed, as if trying to highlight the difference in our situations. Her words were filled with venom as she asked me what I hoped to achieve, telling me Anthony had nothing left and that pursuing this would only hurt me and the children. I stared at her, feeling anger rise within me. I told Charlotte she had already caused enough damage, and if she wasn't interested in Anthony anymore, she should leave him alone. I made it clear that if she thought I would back down, she was greatly mistaken, explaining that I wasn't fighting for myself, but for my children. Even Charlotte seemed taken aback by the strength in my words. Though the confrontation with Charlotte was emotionally draining, I refused to let it defeat me. Each passing day made me stronger and more certain that I was doing the right thing. I knew the journey would be long, but I had no intention of giving up. These were steps toward the life my children and I deserved. The following weeks were an emotional storm. Every day brought new challenges, from confrontations with Charlotte to Anthony's evasive attitude about child support. Still, I kept going with my daily routine, getting up early to get Anna and Isaac ready, going to work, and studying at night. One morning, while I was reviewing documents at the office, I received an unexpected call from Sarah, my lawyer. Her voice was serious and concerned as she told me that Anthony had filed a countersuit demanding joint custody of the children. My world started spinning. The mere thought that Anthony might try to take Anna and Isaac away was unbearable. I felt betrayed and angry, but more than anything, I was terrified. My voice trembled as I told her this was impossible, that Anthony had never truly cared about the children, that even when he was around, he was nothing more than a visitor. Sarah tried to calm me down, assuring me that we would face this together, though she warned me to be prepared as Anthony might try to use my financial situation against me. While Sarah's words offered some comfort, after hanging up the phone, I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare. I couldn't understand how Anthony, who had taken everything and abandoned us, now claimed the right to take the children. That afternoon, I could barely concentrate at work. Ron noticed my distress and approached me, sincerely offering his support and telling me to take time if I needed it. After a moment's hesitation, I decided to trust him, and confided my fears about Anthony's lawsuit. To my surprise, Ron not only listened but offered unexpected help, telling me he knew a reliable family law attorney who was a close friend and might work with me. Ron's empathy touched me deeply. That evening, I met with Brandon, the lawyer Ron had recommended. After hearing my story, Brandon assured me we had a strong case, explaining that the court would consider what was best for the children. He pointed out that based on my account, Anthony had no record of fulfilling his paternal responsibilities. Brandon's calm tone provided a small measure of comfort as he emphasized the importance of staying strong and level-headed throughout this process. The following weeks were filled with hardship. Anthony, true to form, tried to craft a narrative that favored him, playing the role of a responsible father. One day, he took Anna to a theme park without informing me, leaving me in a state of terror for hours, not knowing where my daughter was. When they returned, Anthony acted as if nothing was wrong, dismissing my concerns as overreactions and claiming he didn't need my permission to spend time with the children. I couldn't contain my anger and snapped back, pointing out how he hadn't considered them his children when he abandoned them, and warning him he would regret it if he took Anna without permission again. The words burned in my throat, but I tried to control my emotions. Still, there were days when the emotional exhaustion overwhelmed me. At night, after the children were asleep, I allowed myself to cry quietly. Yet somehow, those tears seemed to strengthen my resolve even further. I couldn't let Anthony have his way any longer. Finally, the day of the hearing arrived, and I wore my best available outfit to court. Sarah and Brandon stood by my side while Anthony appeared with his own lawyer, who seemed more intent on intimidation than defense. The judge listened to both sides. Sarah presented solid evidence that I had been the primary caregiver for the children from the beginning. Brandon emphasized Anthony's past indifference to the children. Anthony, on the other hand, tried to paint me as a mother too busy with work and studies to properly care for the children. His lawyer claimed that Anthony only wanted what was best for the children and believed joint custody would create a more balanced relationship. As I listened to these words, my throat tightened and I felt a heavy weight in my chest. When my turn came, I gathered my courage to speak. Through my tears, I told the judge with a steady voice that I loved my children more than anything, that everything I had done and sacrificed was for them. I explained that Anthony had abandoned us when we needed him most and was now here for superficial reasons only. I made it clear that I wasn't trying to keep them from their father, I just wanted to ensure they grew up in a stable, safe environment. After what felt like days compressed into hours, the judge finally ruled. Anthony would be granted supervised visitation, but I would retain primary custody of the children. When I heard the verdict, I was overwhelmed by a mixture of relief and exhaustion. I knew this wasn't the end of the battle, but it was a significant step toward providing stability for my children. That night, as I had dinner with Anna and Isaac, I could finally breathe easily. Anna raised her glass of milk with a bright smile and told me I was the best mom in the world, thanking me for always protecting them. She had no idea how deeply meaningful those words were to me. With a mixture of innocence and confusion on her face, I felt my heart breaking again. I had done my best to protect them from the pain Anthony had caused, but I realized I couldn't control what he said to them. I stroked Anna's hair while fighting back tears, telling her that although her daddy had his reasons, this was our home and we were together here. That was what mattered most, even if things sometimes sounded different. What was important was that we would always be together, including Isaac. That night, as I tried to study at the kitchen table, my mind wandered. It felt unfair that Anthony could so easily manipulate Anna while I worked every day to build trust and love with the children. Anna's words echoed in my ears, reminding me of the difficulty of competing with Anthony's empty promises. Tension peaked one Saturday afternoon, when Anthony showed up unannounced, demanding to see the children. I met him at the door while I was cooking. I tried to stay calm as I told him he couldn't just show up like this, that there were rules he needed to follow. Anthony responded arrogantly, questioning why he needed rules to see his children and telling me I couldn't control everything, claiming he had the right to see them whenever he wanted. I raised my voice for the first time, telling him he had no right to appear as he pleased after hurting us, and that if he truly wanted to be a good father, he needed to respect us. Anthony seemed surprised, but still wouldn't back down. I physically blocked him when he tried to enter the house. I told him with unexpected determination that I would call the police if he tried anything, and that I wouldn't let him disrupt our lives again. Anthony finally left, but the incident left me trembling with anger and fear. I understood he wouldn't give up easily, and I needed to prepare for what was coming. The following days were a whirlwind of emotions. Anna seemed to be keeping her distance, trying to process everything that was happening. Isaac, still too young to understand the situation, remained my source of joy. At work, Ron noticed my distress and reached out, telling me that while he understood I didn't want to bring personal problems to work, he wanted to help and I didn't need to handle everything alone. His kind words touched me deeply. While expressing my gratitude, I felt acutely aware of how much I needed to resolve on my own. Still, Ron's conversation reminded me that I wasn't completely alone. Beyond Sarah's legal support, I had a small but precious circle of support. One afternoon after work, I stopped at the park where I used to take the children. I sat on a bench, watching families play and hearing their laughter, letting my long-suppressed emotions flow in tears. Then I felt a hand on my shoulder, and turning around, I saw Victoria standing there. She was the neighbor who had supported me during the darkest period of my life. She told me that while she knew I was going through difficult times, I should remember that storms don't last forever, that I was stronger than I thought, and that the children knew this too. She reminded me that for them, I was their shelter, their rock, and I should never forget that. Her words, accompanied by deep wisdom and a gentle smile, resonated in my heart. That night, back home, I sat with Anna and Isaac, deciding to talk to my daughter in a way she could understand. Through tears, I told Anna that I understood she missed her daddy and that he said nice things, but she and Isaac were my everything, and everything I did was because I loved them. Anna hugged me tightly, seeming to understand the weight of my words. She told me she loved me too and wanted to always stay with Isaac and me. Her words filled my heart with new hope. As the children slept, I made a quiet vow to myself. I wouldn't let Anthony or anyone else endanger the stability I was working so hard to build. For the first time in a long while, I felt strong, ready to do whatever was necessary for my children's happiness. The next morning, dawn slowly arrived, painting the sky orange and gold, but I barely noticed the light streaming through the small window. I had been awake all night, thinking about Anna's words and Anthony's promises. Somewhere in my heart, I wished he would change, but his past neglect and recent behavior filled me with doubt. Despite my exhaustion, I got up before the children woke. I prepared a simple breakfast with the few ingredients we had left. As I whisked the eggs to serve with the bread I had bought the night before, Anna came into the kitchen dragging her favorite blanket. She said good morning while rubbing her eyes. I smiled, though my heart still felt heavy. I greeted her back and told her to sit down, saying breakfast would be ready soon. I stroked Anna's hair gently as she sat down at the table, watching my movements with curious eyes. Suddenly, my daughter broke the silence with a question that pierced my heart. She asked me if I had seen her dream where Anthony and I were together again, living in a beautiful house with lots of toys for Isaac. She wanted to know if that dream would ever come true. I felt a lump form in my throat at her question, filled with both hope and nostalgia. I couldn't ignore her feelings, but I also couldn't give her false hope. I explained to her that while I understood how much she loved her father and wished for everyone to be happy, some things couldn't go back to the way they were. I told her that what mattered most was the three of us staying together and finding ways to be happy, no matter what. My voice was steady, but I struggled to fully believe my own words. Although Anna seemed to accept this, I could see she was deep in thought. I knew this wouldn't be our last conversation about this topic. I had made up my mind to always be honest with my children, no matter how difficult the truth might be. Later that day, I headed to the office, which usually felt like a sanctuary to me. That day, however, the atmosphere felt particularly heavy, as Anthony's continued attempts to circumvent the court's restrictions were weighing on my mind. Ron noticed my distress and approached me with concern. He assured me that this was a safe place and offered his support if I needed time or someone to talk to. His sincere words touched me deeply, and I felt grateful. While I acknowledged his kindness, I chose not to share too much at that moment. Still, I could feel that Ron's support was genuine. After work that afternoon, I decided to stop by the park where I used to take the children. I needed some time to gather my thoughts before heading home. As I walked among the trees, I had the unsettling feeling of being watched. Looking around, I spotted Charlotte sitting on a nearby bench. She waved me over, and after a moment's hesitation, I decided to approach her. Charlotte's expression was different from her usual arrogance, showing vulnerability and anxiety. She told me she knew I didn't want to see her, but she needed to talk to me. I crossed my arms and asked her what she could possibly have to say, considering everything she had done. Charlotte sighed heavily, as if carrying a burden. She revealed that Anthony wasn't the person I thought he was, explaining that she had left him after discovering something about him and realizing he would never change. She told me she knew how hard I was fighting for my children and wanted to warn me that despite Anthony's charm, he would always put his own interests first. There was sincerity in her words that I couldn't ignore, even though I viewed her with suspicion. While I couldn't fully trust her intentions, I decided not to dismiss her warning entirely. I asked her, maintaining my guard, why she was telling me this now and what she hoped to gain. Charlotte lowered her eyes, appearing ashamed. She explained that this was her way of making amends, acknowledging her role in causing my pain. She said she didn't expect forgiveness, but hoped that helping protect my children would allow her to feel she had done something right. I was uncertain whether to believe Charlotte, but I figured there was nothing to lose by being cautious. With a mix of confusion and distrust, I bid Charlotte goodbye and headed home with renewed vigilance. That night, watching Anna and Isaac sleep, I felt the burden on my shoulders heavier than ever before. Yet I knew one thing with certainty. No matter how Anthony tried to unsettle me, or what mysterious warnings Charlotte brought, I would not stray from my main purpose. My purpose was to protect my children and give them a better life. For the first time in weeks, I found myself able to smile while imagining the future. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I also knew I wasn't alone in this fight. I had my children, Sarah, Ron, and most importantly, an unshakable determination. After meeting Charlotte, I felt constantly unsettled. Her words kept echoing in my mind that Anthony wasn't the man I thought he was. While I doubted Charlotte's intentions, I couldn't deny that her words had affected me deeply. I wondered what secrets my former husband was hiding. Now it seemed he was trying to regain control. I knew I needed to stay vigilant, but I couldn't let my doubts paralyze me. I maintained my daily routine of making breakfast, taking Anna to school, working long hours, and studying at night. Even when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm me, my children's smiles gave me strength. One afternoon, while I was organizing documents in the office, Ron approached me with a serious yet gentle expression. He told me he had something important to discuss about my situation, placing an envelope on my desk. I stared at him in surprise, asking why he was involved in my personal issue with Anthony. Ron explained that he had connections and had discovered Anthony was using dangerous contacts. He revealed that Anthony was seeking influence to circumvent the court's decisions and was even investigating my workplace to discredit me. My heart pounded as anger, fear, and determination collided within me. I told Ron that if Anthony was going to attack me this way, I needed to be prepared, trying to maintain my composure. Ron nodded and continued, advising me to stay calm and not let Anthony manipulate me. He informed me that Sarah and Brandon were aware of the situation and working to counter Anthony's moves. He reminded me that I wasn't alone and offered his support, placing his hand on my shoulder. Though I thanked him, I couldn't help feeling a new weight of concern. That night, I found an envelope outside my door when I returned home. At first, I thought it was related to the court case, but my heart sank when I opened it. Inside were photographs of me coming and going from work, and pictures of me with Ron and Sarah. There was also a hastily written note that said to be careful, that all my actions would have consequences. I felt myself trembling. It was clearly Anthony's doing. His intention was to intimidate me and shake my confidence in protecting my children. However, instead of breaking me, this note only strengthened my resolve. I realized I couldn't wait any longer for things to resolve themselves naturally. The next day, I decided to take action and met with Sarah and Brandon, showing them the photos and note. The two lawyers exchanged glances, expressing their concern. Sarah spoke firmly, telling me this was clearly harassment that couldn't be ignored and suggested we submit it to the court as evidence of Anthony's manipulative behavior. She added that we could also petition for additional measures to protect me and the children. Brandon nodded in agreement, pointing out that while Anthony had crossed a dangerous line, we could potentially use this to our advantage. He suggested this could serve as damaging evidence against Anthony, and the lawyers began discussing legal strategies. Although I felt vulnerable, seeing Anna playing with Isaac when I got home reminded me that I had to keep moving forward. They were depending on me, and I couldn't give in to fear. But Anthony's threats weren't my only problem. A few days later, I noticed a dramatic change in Anna's behavior. My once bright and curious daughter had become quiet and somehow distant. Whenever I tried to talk to her, she would only say she was tired or had nothing to talk about. One night, while reading her bedtime story, I decided to ask her directly. As I gently stroked her hair, I asked if there was anything she wanted to say or if something was worrying her. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. With a trembling voice, she asked if what her father had said was true, that I didn't want her to see him because I didn't love either him or her. My heart shattered at those words. I was shocked to discover that Anthony's manipulation had reached our daughter, something I never imagined possible. Through my own tears, I held her tightly. I told her that wasn't true at all, that I loved her more than anything in the world and had always wanted the best for her. I explained that sometimes adults say things that aren't true when they're angry, but she and Isaac were my everything. Later that night, after Anna had finally fallen asleep, I sat in the living room. In front of me was a small pile of bills to be paid. Though the situation seemed more difficult than ever, something told me I was on the right path. No matter how hard Anthony tried to destroy things, he couldn't take away what mattered most, the love of my children. As dawn broke, I sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by legal documents and unpaid bills. I had barely slept, thinking about Anna's words and Anthony's threats. His manipulation of our daughter filled me with both anger and deep sadness. I knew I needed to be stronger than ever before. Not just for myself, but for the two small lives who depended on my strength. Anna woke up early and came to me, dragging her blanket. I noticed her giving me somewhat reserved looks, as if she was still processing our conversation from the night before. I said good morning. I showed Anna a warm smile, put aside the papers, and hugged her. Anna looked up at me with hopeful eyes and asked if we could play together after school. I felt a lump in my throat as I realized I had been sacrificing special time with my children while focusing on the legal battles and maintaining our home. I told her of course we could, princess, and that today would be just for her and Isaac. As I stroked her hair, I silently vowed never to let Anthony's actions rob me of time with my children. Later at the office, Ron came in with a serious expression, carrying a local newspaper. He asked me to look at something and placed the paper on my desk. The front page featured an article about alleged maternal neglect. The article claimed I was too busy with work and studies to care for my children, and included candid photos of me that had been taken without my knowledge. It portrayed Anthony as a concerned father trying to protect his children. I felt my blood boiling as I read the article. I trembled with anger, demanding to know how he could do this, using the media to attack me and manipulate public opinion. Ron looked at me with sympathetic eyes. He told me it was a despicable tactic but urged me not to get upset, explaining that Sarah and Brandon were already working on legal countermeasures. He added that if we could prove these articles false, they could actually serve as evidence against Anthony. That afternoon, when I went to pick up Anna from school, I noticed several parents watching me with suspicious looks. They whispered among themselves while staring at me. Anna, oblivious to the hostile atmosphere, ran to me with a smile. I felt the weight of their stares as we headed home. During dinner that night, I decided to talk to the children about the current situation. I understood I couldn't shield them from everything, but I wanted them to know we were united in facing these challenges. I told Anna and Isaac that sometimes people say untrue things about us, but what matters most is staying united and not letting those words affect us. Anna nodded, though she seemed confused. She asked in a quiet voice if this was because of what her father had said. I told her there were many things happening, but not to worry because I would always protect her and Isaac. I held them tightly as I said this. Later that night, after putting the children to bed, I received a call from Sarah. She told me she had discovered something important, that Anthony appeared to have connections with influential local business people who might be behind the article. She warned me to be prepared as things might get more complicated before they were resolved. I felt tension building in my chest as I listened to her words. I told her I would do whatever it took, I just wanted this resolved quickly. The following days proved to be a real test for me. At work, some colleagues, presumably influenced by the article, began treating me coldly. Additionally, Anna told me she was being teased by other children who were clearly repeating things they had heard from their parents. Still, I refused to give up. One day, while heading to a nearby store, I ran into Charlotte again. This time she seemed more nervous than usual. She told me we needed to talk, that there were things I should know about Anthony. She kept looking around as if afraid of being seen. Though hesitant, I decided to listen. I crossed my arms and asked her what he was doing now. Charlotte took a deep breath before answering. She confessed that Anthony was desperate, having lost more money than I realized. She revealed he was trying to use the children to gain sympathy and was even considering leaving the country if his plans failed. Her words rang warning bells in my mind. If Anthony was considering leaving the country, there were no limits to what he might do. That night, I contacted Sarah and Brandon to discuss our next move. They decided to take additional legal measures to prevent Anthony from taking the children out of the country. Though the battle continued, I felt a new strength growing inside me. Every challenge I faced made me stronger and deepened my resolve to protect what was mine. I knew the road ahead was still long, but for the first time in a while, I could imagine a future where my children and I would finally find peace. The tension in my life had reached an almost unbearable level. Each day was a battle against fear, uncertainty, and the web of lies Anthony was weaving around us. Yet in the midst of this storm, something was changing within me. My eyes now showed not just pain, but strong determination. After fighting so hard, I simply could not lose. That morning, while preparing breakfast, I sat facing Anna and Isaac. I watched them lovingly while trying to hide my concerns. Despite my tired face, I managed a genuine smile as I suggested we make this a good day and do something fun after school. Anna nodded excitedly and hugged Isaac, saying she wanted to go to the park and ride the swings with him. I nodded while stroking their hair. Though the pressure still weighed heavily on my heart, I decided to make this day about remembering what it meant to be a family. After dropping Anna off at school, I received a call from Sarah. Her voice sounded more worried than ever. She explained there was a problem, that Anthony was trying to expedite legal proceedings to gain immediate joint custody, likely using this to justify his next moves. She urged me to come to her office immediately. Though I felt my legs trembling, I took a deep breath and firmly told her I would be right there. When I arrived at Sarah's office, both she and Brandon were waiting for me. I remember the day I walked into the legal office, with my heart racing, surrounded by stacks of legal documents that seemed to whisper tales of impending challenge. My lawyer Sarah looked at me with serious eyes while adjusting her glasses, telling me that Anthony was becoming desperate and taking drastic actions. She explained that we needed concrete evidence to prove his true intentions, and suggested that Charlotte might be the key witness who could help us. My mind drifted back to my last conversation with Charlotte, a woman I never thought would become an ally in my fight to protect my children. I felt skeptical about her motives, but something in her recent behavior suggested she genuinely wanted to make amends. I told Sarah I would talk to Charlotte, believing that if she truly wanted to make things right, she would help me. That afternoon, I met Charlotte in an inconspicuous cafe, her nervous energy palpable as she glanced around the room. I looked her straight in the eye and said, "Charlotte, I need your help. Anthony is trying to use my children to achieve his own goals. If you have any information that could help me, please share it." My voice was a mixture of desperation and determination, a tone that seemed to crack with the weight of everything I was fighting for. Charlotte looked down, nervously stirring her coffee cup, and began to speak. She admitted her past mistakes, how she had been blinded by Anthony's charm, and then revealed something that made my heart nearly stop. She told me Anthony was planning to leave the country before losing parental rights, intending to take Anna and Isaac to start a new life elsewhere. The mere thought of losing my children sent a paralyzing fear through my entire body. I asked her point blank if she would be willing to testify in court, emphasizing that this was not about me, but about protecting my children from bearing the consequences of Anthony's actions. Charlotte slowly nodded, saying she could not remain a part of this situation any longer and would help stop Anthony if she could. Her words were a glimmer of hope in what had been a dark and uncertain journey. Sarah and Brandon immediately began working on an emergency motion, preparing to present our case to the judge. Meanwhile, I tried to maintain my composure at home, careful not to let my children sense the gravity of our situation. The day of the hearing arrived quickly, and I dressed in my best outfit, holding Anna's hand tightly as we entered the courtroom. Sarah stood beside me, her expression resolute and determined. As I entered the courtroom, Anthony maintained a calm expression, but his eyes held a cold intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. Charlotte took the witness stand, her words crystal clear as she exposed Anthony's true intentions. The judge's face hardened when he heard about Anthony's plan to flee the country. He addressed Anthony firmly, stating that the court would not tolerate any attempts to evade the law. The judge emphasized that Anthony's actions showed a lack of respect not only for the children's mother but also for the entire judicial system. He ruled that Anthony's supervised visitation would be stopped and that I would have sole custody of our children. Tears streamed down my face as I hugged Sarah and Brandon. The battle wasn't over, but I had won a significant victory. That night, sharing dinner with Anna and Isaac, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. The journey had been long and difficult, but I was certain I had made the right choices. Anna looked at me with curious eyes and asked why I was crying. I told her these were tears of happiness, explaining that being together was what mattered most. I held my children close, feeling their warmth and love. Months later, I found myself looking out the window of my new office at Ron's company, where I had been promoted with more responsibilities. On my desk sat photos of Anna and Isaac, their smiles capturing my heart. I occasionally reflected on the past. Anthony had disappeared after the court's decision. Rumors suggested he had been exposed for improper business dealings, lost his job, and been abandoned by his influential contacts. Charlotte, too, had apparently started a new life in another city after speaking the truth. But I no longer allowed these memories to trouble me. The anger and resentment I once felt had dissolved. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but a sense of liberation from their influence. My new colleague Justin interrupted my thoughts, smiling warmly as he handed me some documents. He mentioned looking forward to our weekend family picnic. Justin had taught me that life always offers new possibilities. He understood my children, and Anna especially enjoyed spending time with him. In the evening, I picked up the kids. Anna had been doing well in school, and Isaac was making friends at daycare. We stopped at a park near our bright new apartment. Anna looked at me and said she wanted to be just like me when she grew up, strong, kind, and never giving up. I hugged her, smiling. Nothing had been easy, but this moment made every struggle worthwhile. I was truly living my life now. At home, a homemade cake from Victoria awaited me. Her note read that my strength was giving courage to those around me. That night, I wrote in my diary about how the deepest pain can lead us to true strength. What matters is believing in oneself and understanding that happiness isn't perfect, but built step by step. Outside, the full moon shone gently. Watching my children sleep, I felt a profound sense of peace. This was the path I had chosen, and finally, I had found true happiness.